In this video, we're going over 10 of the best rare quality cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, which serve as some of the best staple cards. And of course, a staple is a term for a card which is usable in pretty much any deck. And at number 10, we have Bacon Saver. This is a card which is almost only useful when it's in the graveyard, as it has the graveyard effect where, during either player's battle step, you can banish this card from the graveyard to negate one attack. However, the effect can only be used once per duel. Ever since Bacon Saver came out, it has kind of consistently seen competitive play, because it's just an excellent card to send to the graveyard if you play any kind of deck which needs to selectively send stuff to the graveyard, or randomly. So, decks that like to use cards like Neos Fusion, which sends Elemental Hero Neos from your deck to the graveyard, as well as one level 4 or lower effect monster, in order to bring out Elemental Hero Brave Neos. A very popular option for that level 4 or lower effect monster is Bacon Saver, because it gives you one free attack negate from the graveyard. Or if you're just playing a Lightsworn engine that mills a whole bunch of cards from your deck to the graveyard, being able to get Bacon Saver in the graveyard while doing your plays like normal is only a benefit. The card would be even better if its effect wasn't once per duel, so usually it's only played at one copy, since you can only use the effect once anyway. And being able to stop a single attack in Duel Links is more valuable than in the regular game, because there's only 3 monster card zones. And rarely do people actually attack with all 3 monster zones occupied. So most of the time Bacon Saver can stop half of your opponent's attacks, or all of them if they're only attacking with a singular monster. And being able to do this from the graveyard is just very beneficial, because it's kind of safe in the graveyard against a vast majority of decks, whereas cards in the field are much more vulnerable to commonly run removal. And at number 9, we have Windstorm of Et Aqua, and also Curse of Anubis. I have both of these cards in the number 9 spot because they both kind of do the same thing, and also kind of have the exact same amount of play rate. Windstorm of Et Aqua is a trap card which simply has the effect to change the battle position of all face-up monsters your opponent controls. Curse of Anubis changes all effect monsters in the field to defense position, and their original defenses become 0, as well as the battle positions not being changeable that turn. Now, what makes these two cards so similar is the fact that in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, as of making this video, you're only able to obtain one copy of both, and they both put nearly all monsters your opponent controls to defense position. Also, they don't have triggers on their activation, which means you can use their effects in response to your opponent trying to destroy either of the two cards. If your opponent uses an MST or Cosmic Cyclone, you can just use Curse of Anubis anyway, in order to put all monsters in the field to defense position, and then still gain the full benefits of the effect. And because both of the cards can be used in pretty much the same way, and you can only get one copy of each, they're usually played alongside each other, if either of them are played in someone's deck. And being able to stall out a full battle phase with only one card without requiring any triggers and being chainable to removal makes both of them still valuable, even if they have kind of fallen out of favor in the modern day. In the early days of Duel Links, these were two of the best staple cards in the game. And at number 8, we have Needlebug Nest. This is a trap card which simply has the effect to send the top 5 cards of your deck to the graveyard. When this card was first added to the game, it didn't really see very much competitive play, because That Grass Looks Greener was still legal in Duel Links. After Grass got banned, Needlebug became one of the best generic ways to send a whole bunch of cards on the top of your deck to the graveyard, as there's lots of cards in the game which allow you to gain advantage from being in the graveyard, like one of the previous spots on this list. In fact, there's lots of decks that love to have cards in the graveyard, and there's a lot of strategies which just benefit from having staple cards in the graveyard, to the point where Needlebug Nest could result in a +5 in card advantage based on some very lucky mills. Although most of the time you won't get lucky and mill all the cards that you want in the graveyard immediately, chances are you'll just mill the cards that you wanted in your hand instead. But with how many good graveyard effects there are in the game nowadays, Needlebug Nest is currently limited to 1 copy per deck, and is generally played in any deck that wants to send a whole bunch of cards from their deck to the graveyard, like Block Dragon or Dinosaurs. And at number 7, we have Hollowed Life Barrier. This is a trap card which requires you to discard 1 card in order to activate it, and has the effect where you take no damage from your opponent's cards for the rest of the turn, and also your monsters cannot be destroyed by battle. So it's a full stop on your opponent being able to attack for 1 turn, at the cost of a -2 in card advantage, and also the minor benefit of stopping your opponent's effect damage for the turn too. And since there's no trigger to this trap card, it has the same benefits as Windstorm of Et Aqua and Curse of Anubis, where you can use the card in response to some form of removal trying to get it off the field preemptively, and still have its full benefits for the entire turn. And in fact, it's better at protecting you for a full turn than Windstorm or Anubis, because it doesn't affect your opponent's current monsters and just makes you immune from taking damage for the turn instead. And that distinction is important because if your opponent, for example, tries to destroy Windstorm of Et Aqua while they have no cards on their side of the field, then being able to chain it in response to that destruction doesn't really mean anything. Or if your opponent just summons a whole bunch of cards afterwards and uses the monsters you put in defense position as just materials for other things, then it doesn't really mean anything as well. Which is why Hollow Life Barrier sees more competitive play as a stall card, and why Windstorm and Anubis have kind of fallen out of a heavy competitive favor. If you're playing a stall deck and you absolutely want to survive a turn, Hollow Life Barrier is going to guarantee that way more than a card like Windstorm or Anubis. And since it's a rare quality card, it's obviously going to be on this list, as it's used in a whole bunch of different decks, even though it has a discard cost and not just stall decks. And at number 6, we have Rebirth of Parshath. This is a counter trap card, which is an Omni Negate that can stop any effect. However, it kind of has a tough activation requirement, where you need to have a counter trap card in your hand to reveal, plus discard one card and pay 1,000 life points. However, the benefits of its tough activation requirements is of course being able to negate any one card your opponent is trying to use, and afterwards, if you successfully negate the effect and shuffle that card back into your opponent's deck, then you get to special summon one Parshath monster from your deck or extra deck. So if you just play the Synchro monster, Avenging Knight Parshath in your extra deck, you'll always have a pretty good monster to special summon after successfully negating one of your opponent's effects on the field. And without having to play any Garnets in your deck, as Avenging Knight Parshath can just comfortably take up one spot in your extra deck instead. Although in order to successfully summon Parshath with its effect, you do need to make sure you're able to shuffle back the effect you're trying to negate. So if you're using the effect to negate an effect that's activating the graveyard or the banished zone, there's a chance you won't be able to shuffle that card back into the deck after the negate, in which case you don't actually get to summon a monster. So you can use it to negate pretty much anything, but it's best to save it for a monster or a card effect that's happening on the field if you want to guarantee the summon of a monster afterwards. Another one of the problems with the card is the fact that you need to have a counter trap card in your hand. So one of the ways people play Rebirth of Parshath in order to guarantee its activation is just to only play counter trap cards as their spell and trap card support. So usually played alongside a lot of cards like Divine Wrath, Wiretap, and the next spot on this list. However, there is also the Gradle engine, which is occasionally used, where the continuous spell card Gradle Impact has an effect which activates at the end of each of your turns, where you can just add any Gradle card from your deck to your hand. So if you add Gradle Combat to your hand, you can just use that in order to have a card to activate the effect of Rebirth of Parshath, even if you don't actually use the effect of Gradle Combat at all, or can even resolve it if you do set it on the field. Additionally, since Gradle Impact can also add other copies of itself to your hand, if it stays on the field long enough, you can just add other copies in order to fuel the discard effect. That way you don't actually have to discard Gradle Combat in order to use Rebirth of Parshath, and you'll just have fuel for more negates. And also, Gradle Impact can be used to destroy another copy of itself in order to destroy one of your opponent's cards. Now, most of the time Rebirth of Parshath is just played alongside other counter trap cards, but the Gradle engine is something that is occasionally used alongside of it in competitive, successful environments, which is why I thought I would mention it here. And at number 5, we have Ultimate Providence. This is another counter trap card which can negate the effect and destroy any card, however, only if you have the discard requirements in your hand. If you wish to negate a spell card, you'll need to have a spell card in your hand in order to discard for its cost. If you want to negate a trap card, you have to have a trap card in your hand, or if you want to negate a monster, you need to have a monster to discard. And unlike Rebirth of Parshath, where you can just discard any card in your hand just as long as you reveal a counter trap card, Ultimate Providence specifically requires you to discard the card of the same type. However, that's usually not a problem, because most of the common cards you want to negate are monster effects, and one of the most common cards you want to put in the graveyard are monsters. So Ultimate Providence sees all kinds of competitive play, because it's just a very versatile Omni-Negate. Generally, decks that use the card want to use it in order to negate a monster effect, although it's very nice to have the option to negate spells and traps as well, which is why Ultimate Providence is played more than cards like Divine Wrath, which allows you to discard any card to negate a monster effect and destroy it, which is probably helped further along by the fact that Ultimate Providence is easy to obtain with its lower rarity. And of course, since it's a counter trap card, cards can't be activated in response to it unless they are also counter trap cards. So if you're going against a Blue Eyes deck and they try to bring out Dragon Spirit of White, who's trying to banish one of your back row cards, you can actually Ultimate Providence it in order to negate and destroy that card, whereas a lot of other removals might be dodged by its quick effect in order to tribute itself to special summon a Blue Eyes from your hand. So, just another little benefit of Ultimate Providence and why it keeps seeing play. It prevents cards from tagging out in order to avoid a negate, like they could do with a Fiendish Chain or a Breakthrough skill. And at number 4, we have World Legacy Clash. This is a quick play spell card which allows you to banish one monster you control until the end phase to then target one monster your opponent controls and cause them to lose attack and defense equal to the original attack and defense of the monster you banished. And a couple of really good things about this card is the fact that it can be used in order to dodge effects. Like if one of your monsters is about to be destroyed by a Raigeki break, you can just chain World Legacy Clash to the effect in order to remove your monster from the field, then lower the attack of one of your opponent's monsters, where your monster will just return during the end phase, nice and unharmed. Also, the attack decrease is permanent, so if you have to use it during your opponent's turn in order to dodge an effect, your opponent's monster will keep the attack decrease, so you can safely beat over it during your turn. Or you can just completely render one of your opponent's boss monsters useless. Alternatively, being able to banish one of your cards is also a benefit as well. Say, one of your monsters is under the effects of one of your opponent's World Legacy Clash, or even one of their Fiendish Chains. You can then banish your monster to reset its attack when it returns to the field, which can also be used to reset cards that are summoned with a different attack point value, like Beast King Barbaros, or lower their own attack in order to activate their effects, like Gaia the Magical Knight of Dragons. In fact, World Legacy Clash was so good that it was put on the semi-limited list, which is usually what they do for staple cards that see too much play, and they want people to stop playing them or to choose them over other staples. So you know a card is a really good staple when it's on the semi-limited list, and even after being placed on that list, it's still seen lots of competitive play. And at number 3, we have Battle Emboxer Veil. This is a hand trap which has the effect where, if you take battle damage, you can special summon this card from your hand and then gain life points equal to the damage you took. And with 1800 defense, Battle Emboxer Veil can potentially stall out an entire battle phase, if your opponent doesn't have another monster with more than 1800 attack, or at the very least block a second attack with its body. And one of the more useful things of Battle Emboxer Veil, and why it sees so much competitive play, probably one of the most played cards in the game even, is the fact that it's triggered after you take battle damage. So, it activates a ton of skills in the game. Take the very popular skill Destiny Draw, for example. You can only use the effect if you've taken at least 2000 points of damage in the duel. So if your opponent just attacks with a monster that has 2000 attack, then you use Battle Emboxer Veil in order to bring it out to gain those life points back, you'll still be able to use Destiny Draw because you took 2000 points of damage, even if your life points are back up to 4000. And since a lot of skills are based on damage done, and because of how safe hand traps are when it comes to battle phases as opposed to spells or traps, Battle Emboxer Veil is just used in pretty much any deck that can accommodate it. Because the card is currently limited to 3, where you can only have 3 copies of the card in your deck, as well as other cards that are limited to 3. And it was kind of emergency put on that list too after it first came out, because it was too easy to obtain just being a rare quality card, and was immediately too useful as well. And at number 2, we have Digital Bug Corbage. This is a rank 5 Xyz monster which requires 2 level 5 light insect type monsters as its materials, which means this card is never brought out with its normal procedure, and almost always brought out with its alternative summoning condition, where you can detach 2 Xyz materials from a rank 3 or 4 insect type Xyz monster you control. Then you can bring this card out of your extra deck on top of that monster and attach all of its materials to this card. And Corbage has 2 effects, where if the battle position of a monster on the field is changed, you can attach 1 insect type monster from your graveyard to this card as an Xyz material. And more importantly, once per turn you can detach one of its Xyz materials in order to shuffle 1 defense position monster your opponent controls back into the deck. And since being able to spin a monster back to the deck is one of the best forms of removal, this is why Corbage is one of the most played Xyz monsters in the game. Because there's a lot of really hard to take out boss monsters that are made just easier to take out if you're able to spin them back into the deck with a reliable to summon extra deck monster. Especially since Digital Bug Corbage is available to rank 3 and rank 4 engines, thanks to number 20 Giga Brilliant and number 70 Malevolent Sin, with Malevolent Sin being one of the best rank 4 monsters available in Duel Links. So everybody's already playing that card anyway, so being able to rank up Corbage on top of it is just an excellent form of utility that is definitely taken advantage of. Especially with the plethora of cards in the game that are changing your opponent's monsters to defense position anyway, with one of the most popular staple cards in the game being Book of Moon, which simply changes one card of the field to face down defense position, being a sitting duck for Digital Bug Corbage to return it to the deck. So if your opponent has an indestructible boss monster, like Bloom Diva the Melodious Choir, if you're able to get it into defense position, you can just spin it back into the deck with Corbage. It is kind of inconvenient that you need to get the card into defense position first, and you can only use the effect a single time if you rank it up on top of one of your previously mentioned Xyz monsters, but it basically gives access to an on-demand spin to any deck that's able to facilitate level 3 or 4 monsters, which a majority of decks in the meta are able to accomplish. And since extra deck monsters that can be brought out through generic materials are just more widely played than any main deck cards, Corbage has easily seen more play in more decks than every other card on this list so far. Well, at least in the recent meta. And at number 1, we have number 18, Heraldry Patriarch. This is a rare quality generic rank 4 monster, which simply requires any 2 level 4 monsters as its materials. And it has the effect where, on a quick effect, if 2 or more monsters of the same name are on the field, you can detach one of this card's Xyz materials in order to choose one of those monsters, and then destroy all other monsters with the same name as that card. Then this card gains a lockdown effect, where your opponent can't summon any monsters that have the same name as that monster is destroyed with its effect. So, if you're going against a Harpy deck, for example, where all their cards change their name to Harpy Lady on the field, then your opponent is locked out of being able to summon the named card Harpy Lady monster from their hand or deck, which stops down their main plays, as Harpy decks heavily rely on summoning Harpy Lady 1 from the deck with Elegant Egotist. Or against Blue Eyes White Dragon decks, where they also summon cards that change their name to Blue Eyes White Dragon on the field, where you can destroy one of those cards to prevent them from summoning other Blue Eyes White Dragons from their deck when they get the White Stone of Ancients in the graveyard. And since Harpy Lady decks are one of the most played and one of the top tier decks in the game, plus Blue Eyes decks just being one of the most popular decks in the game, number 18 Heraldry Patriarch occupies a nice spot in a ton of extra decks. Just in case. Although another thing to note about the card is its mirror match potential as well, as it allows you to destroy your opponent's cards if they summon a monster with the same name as a monster you control as well, as the whole 2 or more monsters of the same name on the field clause to its effect does not all have to be on your opponent's side of the field, and it only locks your opponent out of summoning cards with its lockdown effect, so it purely has benefits to the person who summons this card in a mirror match, as you can destroy your opponent's cards and then lock them out of summoning them. So, out of every card on this list, Patriarch is easily the most included cards in all kinds of extra decks, even if you probably don't see it as often as something like Battling Boxer Veil. The power of a useful, generic, rank 4 Xyz monster is just not to be underestimated when it comes to widespread play. Alright, and that's the list. If you know of any other rare cards that I might have missed or have ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to read them down in the comments.